I'm going to talk about conditional SwiftUI, so modifying and replacing views and how that kind of works. First of all, Chris, you did a great introduction. I don't need to go over anything else. Yeah, I make the Old English Wordhord app and packages and a bunch of stuff. I've been doing this since 2020. And fun fact, I recently saved my air conditioner from a falling icicle. It was massive, and I used a big table to block it. And it's a little thing that happened the other day in our icy north of Toronto. So moving on to the topic at hand, conditional view modifiers. I've seen this on Stack Overflow and blogs, lots of other places. It crops up in code here and there. It's this idea of like an if modifier. Like, what if I could have a modifier that only applies in certain conditions? So sometimes it's called apply if or modify if or if let. There's a lot of different variations I've seen. And it sort of applies or doesn't apply a modifier based on a condition. It seems very clever, but it's perhaps a bit too clever, and I'm going to get into why that is in a bit. First, I want to talk about SwiftUI. I love SwiftUI. To me, it feels like I'm building a big like mechanical robot that's able to change and rebuild itself based on the state of all my data and everything that's going on. So I kind of love these little automata things. It's kind of like that in my head of what I'm doing when I'm building SwiftUI view trees. So it's called declarative UI because that's kind of what it does. It responds to everything, but I like to think of it as a little robot. So when you got your SwiftUI views, you might have different parts or different components, and they have properties you can change, and you can tie all those different things to state values and build your little robot. One of the things you can do, oh, I've got the audio on there, sorry. You can modify each component. You can have eyes blink, arms bend, shoes could change color, anything can sort of happen. But beyond modification, you can also replace components. So you could swap out a finger for a screwdriver or change the number of legs or swap out legs for wheels. And this is when you're replacing one view for another. So you have these two tools at your disposal, sort of modifying existing views, changing properties, and replacing views. Sometimes these two can seem to do the same sort of thing. So you have a leg here and you're applying a certain tint color based on the state. And in the other option there, you've got two leg views, one with a tint, one without. The same thing will happen in both cases, kind of. And that's where it gets a little different. So with replace, you're throwing the entire leg out and bringing in a brand new leg. So thinking about that leg view maybe has a certain position that it's in. It might be moving, it might be kicking something in that motion. And whatever that view is doing, all that state might be buried in there and the animation is going on. If you change the tint color in the middle of all that, you throw that whole leg out and you get a whole new leg instead. So you've now lost whatever that state is, whatever the animation was going on, and all you want to do is change a tint color. So that's why it's often best to kind of stick to those modifications when you want to keep the same view the same, and think about when you are doing those replacements that you all actually intend to replace that whole view stack with something else. And that brings me back to this if view modifier, because you're looking at that and you're thinking, okay, if it's tinted, I'm going to apply that is tinted view modifier. And to me, this looks more like a modify than a replace. It looks like it's just making some changes to my existing view. It's not replacing anything. But let's have a look inside and see what's actually going on. Inside that if statement, you've got the conditional there, and then you've got the closure, and you can see right there, you've got if condition transform self or provide self. So you have two versions of self. Those are the same two that we saw previously with two legs. We've got two different branches that it can go down, and the entire view will be replaced. But when you're using this if modifier, all you're going to see is one, and you just see this one modifier being applied. And I guess you imagine maybe it's not applied in another situation, but it's the same view. So it's actually doing a replace when it feels like it's doing a modification. And this is not exactly that great. I think it's a good idea to avoid using these if modifiers because it hides those view replacements. You might have a weird bug in your app and you don't know what's causing it. And it could be that whole view stack is getting replaced when you think you're just changing a setting inside of it. So you're going to lose the state, you're going to lose the animation, glitches will occur. So try to stick to those conditional properties when you want to keep something the same and not change that view for a different view. Sometimes, however, That's not possible. You've got button style, for example. It only takes one type, and all the button styles are different types. So if you try and drive that modifier, you try and have a little state change between the two styles, this code won't compile because it can't change. So you have to provide two different button style view modifiers, and now you're back in the branching world of replacing the view. So I think if you are replacing, you need to embrace that replacing. You need to know that's what's doing, that's how it should look in your code, that you are using two very different buttons with different styles, and they might be swapped out based on a state change. That will hopefully make you not have these sort of other problems that creep up to do with state issues and all that, because you won't have it hidden within a modifier. But let's say you actually did want to have that button actually animate between these two states. You wanted the border to appear or disappear in an animated way. You would have to actually go and make a custom button style and then put the animation inside that button style and provide properties so that you could then use just one button style modifier with the properties animating, keeping the same view stack above it. So that's all great, but is there a safe way to use if? Like maybe there's a way we could still keep it around. It seems very helpful. But the problems, as we know, are loss of state or animation glitches. So what if the condition doesn't change at runtime? And the one I'm thinking of is if available. So the OS is never going to change at runtime. It's going to be the same OS that it was to begin with. So these two branches you're seeing here, they're never going to change. You're only going to execute one once you're running your code. So you have no risk of state loss or animation glitches within it. So can we maybe take this and reduce it down? Maybe make our own little if available view modifier or extension in this case. And you can see this one's a little bit different from the if modifier I showed before. There's only one use of self, so there's no branching going on inside here. And that's because the branching is going to happen inside the closure. Here it is in the same use case as before. So we have one image. We don't have that duplication as we had previously. We have a modifier called if available, and inside the view modifier is telling you what it should say next. It should say if available, and that's where you use your branching. You create the two different versions with the different modifiers on them, and you can sort of have that branching without all the risk involved. It is a little bit more verbose, but this is what I use in my code. I find it's very helpful because it's very clear about what's going on. It lets you attach view modifiers without having to reorganize your whole view stack, and you don't have to worry about the branching. So what if you have a situation where you want to do this a lot? Like, let's say there's one view modifier you really like for a new OS. You want to use it all over the place, but you don't want to have 7 lines of code every time you're trying to branch and show the two different options. You can actually make your own custom little if availables as well. And this is something I've done with my code. So widget extentable was a cool new feature they added in iOS 16, but I have code that supports older than that. So I want to apply it in different places throughout a lot of different widgets. So why not make a widget extentable if available extension and use that one instead? So inside that, I use the if available. I have the same code you saw previously, and I pass through all the parameters to the function. So when you end up using that in some situation in your code, you just have that one line. It has the words if available right in there. It'll also be colored differently from the standard one that came with SwiftUI, so it'll help it stand out a bit more. But this means you can use these if availables without having to worry, because again, the branch is never going to change. It's very clear that this function is only going to be available in certain versions of iOS. So yeah, that's the solution I use right now. I think it's kind of helpful. I think it's a way of using if statements as modifiers without the risk of doing other things. I will say with if available here, if you could put anything you want in there. This is just a closure. So you could have if whatever condition you want and use it just like that. But I try to name it as such so that it reminds you to use only if available inside this thing. It should be a red flag if you see anything else. So yeah, to wrap it up, conditional SwiftUI. I'm trying to build a SwiftUI robot. This should have no volume. There we go. I like building SwiftUI robots. I like to think of them as robots. I like to think about the difference between modifying and replacing views. I want to avoid those little if modifiers that are out there, and instead I use my own little if available one. I find that helpful, and I create my own custom if available, so I think that's kind of handy too. So I think that's about all I have in there. This is all my info. This is where you can find me on social media. These are all the different fun packages I make. You can find all of that on thiswayup.dev. And I want to thank you guys for having me today.